to the cloud as we speak.
Well, welcome everyone. It's great to see you all here. Welcome to another tour. If we don't know each other for some reason, I'm sure I do with everybody here, my name is David Russo. I'm one of the rabbis at Anshe Emet. I want to give big thanks again to Amy Karp for organizing this. Amy, it's not like this was a chill last few weeks for the one and only Amy Karp, doing everything for the high holidays. Amy, thank you so much for all that you do all the time, and especially to still be able to put together amazing programs like this that I know we all love so much. So I'm really excited to introduce my brother, Josh Shuki Hartuv. Josh made Aliyah in 2011. He served in the IDF in a paratrooping unit, lived on Kibbutz Sa'ad. He graduated from Israel's tour guide course. He's done a number, I think probably almost 5 of these tours by now. And I know we always get to learn something new, and we love also doing something to prepare for whatever's coming up in the Jewish life cycle or season. So coming up starting tomorrow night is the holiday of Sukkot. So Josh, yeah, so you can see Josh is sitting, he's actually currently in Hamilton, Ontario with my parents, sitting in the sukkah that they've already decorated. I'm sitting in the sukkah that is already falling apart and not yet decorated. So we welcome you into our sukkah, feel the warmth and love in our Sukkot as we travel through Jewish history, exploring the history of Sukkah and Sukkot. So Josh, take it away. Oh, and sorry, one last thing. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat anytime. So, and then Josh will try and get to it at some point. But so go to the chat, you can type in a question, and Josh will try and get to you. Go ahead, Josh.
Great, perfect. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you all again. I'm sorry that this time I'm not doing this from Tel Aviv or from Israel. This time I'm doing it from Canada. Basically, my family decided that just after Rosh Hashanah, as the lockdown in Israel was starting to get more and more serious, that we decided to escape Israel and come to Canada, Eretz HaKodesh, to be with my parents because we haven't seen them in a very long time. So I want to thank my Ima and Abba for hosting and letting us use their internet, but more importantly, letting us enjoy being in the sukkah. This is the first tour that I've done with you guys where I haven't had to do a virtual background. You can see my fingers and hands move perfectly fine and perfectly normal and not kind of going in and out of the whatever backdrop I have related to the tour that we are going to do today. So today, let's get started. So today, what are we going to be talking about? Today, the whole concept of the tour is to trace the whole history of this really strange, peculiar, fascinating, amazing holiday known as Sukkot. Can everyone see the screen that I'm sharing okay? Okay, perfect, amazing. So we're going to be tracking kind of the whole history of this holiday of Sukkot, understanding all of the customs that we do, tracing it back through history, which customs were more popular when, which were less popular when, and what is happening right now today on Sukkot all around the world. So that's basically the short, easy task that we're going to be doing today in under an hour. And I wanted to start with you today here. Now, where we are today, where I'm standing with you right now, is actually on the other side of the Jordan River, on the Jordan side of the Jordan River, in a place called Deir Allah. Now, in Deir Allah, we have this, what's called a tell. Now, again, we've talked about tells a little bit before, which is these archaeological sites where what was found in this archaeological site was something really interesting, which is this stone that has the signature of Bil'am ben Be'or, which is a famous prophet from the time of Tanakh. But more importantly than that, is that it is in this spot, Deir Allah, that since the time of the Talmud and the Mishnah, so around 2,000 years, this has been the spot that has been associated with the first Sukkot. I'm not talking about the holiday of Sukkot, I'm talking about the place Sukkot. Where in this place, this is where Jacob, in a way, runs away from Esav or moves away from Esav and finds himself a place where he can call home, a shelter that he can call home. And for 2,000 years, this has been the spot where it has been considered what it is. And again, this is before the holiday of Sukkot has been invented. Now, there's another place called Sukkot, which is over here. Where we are right now is we've moved now from the southern part of the Jordan River, just north of the Dead Sea on the Jordan side. We've moved now to the Sinai Desert. Around where this person is, it's over here. Now, some of you may recognize this map from when we did our Sinai tour, because we used this to talk about how Bnei Israel moved from Eretz Goshen, from where the slaves or the Israelite slaves were in Egypt, and then moved towards Sinai to Mount Sinai. Now, based on the calculations of what's a 9-day journey, according to Tanakh, from Eretz Goshen along the Red Sea. So there's some people that say that it was over here. Some people say that it was on this side of the Red Sea. We're actually looking at it from let's look at another map of the Sinai Desert. We're looking at essentially this area over here, which is the area that is already where you can see all the different multiple colors, all that kind of stuff. It's essentially the first water source of the Sinai Desert if you had crossed the Red Sea and walked further down to the south. Now, it's unclear if Sukkot was before or after the crossing of the Red Sea, depending on when you read it from the Tanakh. But what's really cool is this place, which is called El Tur, Egypt, which is where some archaeologists say Sukkot is. Now you can see that it's a surfing colony that has all these bamboo Sukkot. If you look up above my head, if you look up above Rabbi Russo, David's head, you can also see that we have bamboo on the top of our sukkah of today. So we've gone to El Tur in Egypt, and we're sitting in a sukkah where the Israel Museum in 2003, I believe, did a whole exhibition about Sukkot throughout time and in different places. And one of them that they did was Desert Sukkot. And so the Desert Sukkot of the people of Israel might have looked like this, and exactly in this spot in the surfing colony of El Tur in Egypt. Now, we don't exactly know why we're supposed to be dwelling in these booths, and we're going to get into that a little bit later on. But one thing for sure is that the name Sukkot of these kind of dwelling places, I think there's someone that might be off of mute. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise, so I don't know if that's Amy, you want to look into that quickly. Anyways, so you have these desert Sukkot that are over here that are filled with all these different leaves and palms, specifically plants and trees that you could find out here in the desert. And this is how the Bnei Israel, how the children of Israel would have sought to find shelter in the desert, as they would have been staying in different places for many times, for a long period of time throughout their period here. Now, we're going to take a break from Sukkot in a way, and now we're going to move to a different holiday. And the other holiday that we're going to be here for is Chag HaAsif. Now, where we're standing right now is in a place called Tel Gezer, which is one of the most important archaeological sites in all of Israel. It's halfway between Tel Aviv, Ir HaKodesh, and Jerusalem over here. So halfway in between, you get this place called Tel Gezer. Now, Tel Gezer has this incredibly, incredibly famous tell with all these amazing findings. And the most important finding is this stone that's over here. Now, this stone now sits in the Istanbul Museum. And so they only have a copy of it in the Israel Museum and at the tell itself. Now, what is it that's on this stone? Can anyone read what's written over here? It's a little bit tough to read it because this is actually the earliest form of Hebrew ever found. And what is this script? What is this thing that was found here? That was the earliest form of Hebrew? Ah, good thing you asked. Let me show you.
בתשרי נתקל פרישה חום נחמד, בחשוון עד יורה ועל גגד, בכסלו נרקיס הופיע בטבת ברד, ובשבט חמה הפציע ליום אחד, באדר על הניחוח מן הפרדסים, בניסן ובכוח כל אחר משים, באייר כל צמח ובסיוון נבקיר, בתמוז ואף שמחנו אחר קציר, תשרי חשוון כסלו טבת חלפו ביעב, גם שנת אדר ניסן אייר סיוון תמוז ואב, ובבוא אלול אלינו ריח סתיו עלה, והתחלנו את שירנו מההתחלה.
What is that song that I was just playing for you? So the song I was playing for you is this amazing Naomi Shemer song, all about the 12 months of the year. It's really a fun song to sing, but it's especially about the end of the year, which is Elul, the last month of the Jewish calendar, and the first month being Tishrei, when the palm tree is kind of starting to give that fruit, is starting to give the tamarim, the dates. And if you look at, and if you look at the Gezer calendar over here, what does it say? You have 2 months gathering, 2 months planting, 2 months late sowing. What are all these things? This is essentially the first blackboard that a teacher might have been using for their students to help explain to them all the months of the year. And so what is Sukkot? The holiday of Sukkot, and connecting with this Chag HaAsif. What is Chag HaAsif? It means the gathering holiday. Is this 1 summer fruit and 2 months gathering? It's the beginning of, the ending in a way of the gathering of all of the different fruits and all the different things from the fields. And so that is really what we're celebrating here on Sukkot. The original form of Sukkot isn't actually celebrating sitting in booths, but the original holiday was this agricultural festival of celebrating, bringing in all the food, and after the summer, all the fruit from the summer, and now we have lots of food to celebrate with. So let's get drunk, let's eat lots of food, and have a really, really fun time. Before I move on, are there any questions anyone might have? If you have any questions, feel free to type it into the chat. Or if you just have fond memories of Naomi Shemer, this is actually the first of 2 Naomi Shemer songs we're going to be playing today. So that is in a way the original form of what Sukkot might have been, which is that Chag HaAsif, the gathering of all the fruits. But there's another meaning for Asif, which means to gather, which is to gather people. Now we've gone back to almost the desert. We're basically in the Judean desert. But if we're looking at the map that we were on before, so we started on this pink dot that's on the right side, on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And now we've gone just over the Jordan River to this spot that's over here, in a place called Argaman. Now, Argaman is one of my favorite places to take tourists to that very few tourists ever actually ask me to take them to, because it's very far out of the way from Jerusalem and from Tel Aviv and all these different places, very far and hard to get to. But what is in Argaman that's really, really fun? The archaeologist named Adam Zartal discovered that in this place, Argaman, there's this huge, massive footprint. Let's take a look at it over here. Discovered this huge, massive footprint. We are sitting where our camera view is where we are, is we're sitting up here, kind of in the audience, like kind of up on the hill. And down below the hill, there's this huge, massive foot. And Adam Zartel noticed a couple of things that are strange about this foot. One is that there were a whole bunch of feet found all over Israel from this time period, from the 13th century, the 12th century BCE. That this footprint over here might be the oldest Jewish pilgrimage site, might be the oldest Jewish temple ever found in Israel. Now, why do we say that it's a Jewish temple? Because on this spot that's over here, this little circle of the footprint is where there's a mizbeach, where there's an altar. And what was found on this altar were different bones from 110 different animals, and all of them from kosher animals, not a single pig, which already is the first kind of sign that says that this is a Jewish site. What's another thing that this is a Jewish site? This whole section in the middle shares the exact same dimensions as the Mishkan and as the Beit HaMikdash, which means that this kind of dimension that's over here, of the temple, basically, of where the sacrifices would take place, where the Kohanim would, where the priests would be. So this dimension over here must have been some kind of holy square meter, whatever, equation that was used in the temple later on. Now, this footprint was in use from the 13th century BCE until the 8th century BCE, when the north part of Israel was destroyed by the Assyrians. And so you have this section that's over here that looks like the temple, an altar over here for kosher animals. So, okay, fine, it was a pilgrimage site, but what was so special about this pilgrimage site? So one thing is that when Adam Zartal sees that it's a footprint, he notices that all throughout Tanakh, all throughout the Bible, there's all these references to feet and footprints. Some, I'm not going to get into all of them right now, that discuss the ownership over the land, that every spot where your foot treads shall be yours. Some talk about connecting to the land, that the feet of our fathers will never leave the land of Israel. Some talk about destroying enemies, that God will squash with his feet the enemies of Israel. And what's interesting is that when you look at the map of where these footprints were found, because there's 5 footprints that have been found, that on these 5 footprints, they're all in the tribe of Menashe, bordering with the tribe of Ephraim over here, which are the 2 most powerful northern tribes in ancient times in Israel. Now, this is a place where Ephraim and Menashe would come together and give sacrifices. All the more so, they're along the Jordan River, which means that the Israelite tribes that were across the Jordan River could come together in the Holy Land at these amazing pilgrimage sites. Now, the question that Adam Zartel asks is, when would these people go to the footprint? And the answer is Sukkot. Now, why does he say Sukkot? Because of the heel of the footprint. If you notice the heel of the footprint, it looks different than the rest of the foot. The rest of the foot is a big wall. The heel of the footprint, you can see, even when we're looking from down below, you can see there's actually a path that people can walk through. And the theory that Adam Zartel poses is that you have the people who enter through this side over here, drop off their animal to be sacrificed with the priests over there, and then walk around in some kind of ceremony around the heel of the foot. And why does he say that this took place on Sukkot? Because on Sukkot, the nickname for Sukkot is something that's called the Chag. Chag, which means holiday in modern Hebrew. But Chag also, if any of you know any of your Arabic or know a little bit about Muslim culture, is that the holiest day of the year, the holiest event that you could do as a Muslim would be to perform the Hajj. And Hajj and Chag are the same word, which means to lachug in Hebrew, which means to circle, to go around something. And in Islam, they go around the Kaaba in Mecca. And in Judaism, we do the Hoshana, where we go around the synagogue. But Adam Zartel, his theory of the footprint is that they would go around this foot, that they would walk around this foot, and that would be the first altar. That was essentially the first Hoshana of the people of Israel. And the greatest, the thing that most supports this theory most that's in Tanakh is this that's from the book of Yechezkel, from the book of Ezekiel, where it says, "It is said to me, O mortal, this place of my throne and the place for the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever." That it's the foot isn't just a symbol of connection to the land or ownership of the land or squashing enemies, but it's God's presence in the people of Israel is in these footprints. And the whole image, the whole metaphor of Sukkot is that we are surrounded by God's presence, that we are building this booth, this bubble that is surrounded by God.
Well, Josh, if I can just add, so we have these like pilgrimage festivals, and Sukkot is this pilgrimage festival. And on this pilgrimage festival, we have, when you have a pilgrimage, it's people have to walk from all over to get there. And they're walking to these pilgrimage sites, and these most ancient sites for the places that you're supposed to walk to are in the shape of God's foot, right? It's as if it's like God's foot is there, and that's why it's shaped, according to this one scholar. The site itself is shaped in the shape of a foot or a footprint, right?
Right, and something I totally forgot that's also really important is that what are the three pilgrimage festivals called, David?
The Shalosh Regalim, the three feet. That was a tough trivia question to put on me like impromptu to make sure I'm paying attention. That wasn't really cool of you, by the way.
So yeah, exactly. These are the Shalosh Regalim. It's so weird that we call pilgrimage festivals in Hebrew the feet, the 3 feet. But Adam Zartel says maybe this is a carryover from this ancient custom of the 3 times a year that we go to the feet, that we go to these Shalosh Regalim. And so the Sukkot is one of, again, these 3 holidays that people come to Jerusalem nowadays, but in ancient times they would have gone to these feet. Now, just to give you a cool sense of what Sukkot looks like at the Kotel on any other year, other than now, is you see all these people that are coming with their lulav and etrog, and they come to the Kotel that's over here. Now, the Kotel, or the temple, becomes connected to Sukkot, starting with the period of Solomon. When Solomon first builds the temple, he does this whole dedication ceremony on Sukkot, and it's called Chanukat Beit HaMikdash. That the dedication, the opening of the temple took place on Sukkot, that Solomon specifically waited for then. And it says in the book of Kings that there was this great mass slaughtering of animals, and it's listed in Tanakh as well, that the big festivities of Sukkot, more so than Shavuot, more so than Rosh Hashanah, more so than Pesach, is how many animals were slaughtered on Sukkot. It was a huge, massive, massive festival specifically for giving sacrifices and big fun parties. And the greatest party of all of the parties that took place at Har HaBayit, at the Temple Mount, was the party of Ezra and Nehemiah. So when Ezra and Nehemiah bring back the Israelite people or the Jewish people from Babylon to Jerusalem, the big festival again, the rededication of the temple again, takes place on Sukkot. And it is on Sukkot where Nehemiah starts a new tradition of reading the whole Torah on Sukkot. The whole Torah gets read on Sukkot. And you can read all about it in the book of Nehemiah. We're not going to have enough time to do all of that. But I bring up that custom because now we're going to go to one of our places that we're going to go around the world to different Sukkot. Or I'm now taking you to Cochin in India, where in India there's this long history of a Jewish community here in India, which dates back to the period of where they date themselves, according to their tradition, back to the period of Solomon, where Solomon was conducting trade all over the world, and there was this great shipwreck in India that stranded a few of the Israelites in Cochin in India on the western coast of India, and the Jewish people stayed there. And they stayed and they thrived and they had a really amazing time there, basically. And they developed their own customs that were connected to, because they continued the trade back and forth with the land of Israel. So their customs are very similar to what you would find in Israel in general, where they have the schach and they have the sukkah. Later on, they adopted the Magen David, the Star of David, as a symbol, as well as a Jewish symbol, which is actually a much more recent symbol, just a few hundred years old. There's even a history of this man over here, Joseph Rabban, who was such an important merchant that he was actually given his own autonomous state in the 11th century in Cochin in India. But they really are connected to that Solomon period and the big celebration of Sukkot, which is why Sukkot is the most important holiday in Cochin, where they come all together into the Jewish quarter of Cochin and they celebrate to this day over there. The other holiday that I wanted to bring up that's not connected to Solomon, but connected to Ezra and Nehemiah, the other groups of people, which is really interesting, are the Samaritans. And they build the most fascinating sukkah. Now, I'm going to show you a quick video of who the Samaritans are. And then after that, we'll go into kind of what the sukkah is all about. So hold on one second. Let me just get into this video that the Times of Israel made just a couple of years ago. Just one second, just gonna make it all big.
We are the children of Israelites. We are the children of Israelites. The Samaritans, we have three passports now. Palestinian, Jordanian, Israelites.
It's similar to Hebrew somehow, but the same, it's similar. It's in between Arabic and Hebrew. Like, for example, Shema, every letter in this language describes a part of your body. For example, Shin is like your teeth. It describes your teeth. And Ain is describe your eyes. It's like your eyes. And it means like there is some similarities between Arabic and Hebrew and the ancient Hebrew.
Ja, Shema fano ilek ja enat Shema fano ilek ja shmulak shalom Shemu Shemi Albani Israel wan heberikma. Amen.
So I hope you enjoy kind of looking at the beautiful Sukkot of the Samaritans. So for those of you who might have been a little bit unclear, so the Samaritans are this strange group of Israelites that they don't identify as Jewish. They identify as themselves as Israelites who live up in the north of Israel by the city of Shechem or Nablus. and they build their sukkah differently than any sukkah in the world, where you can see, again, my sukkah that I have in Hamilton in Canada over here has bamboo on its roof, and most people use various different trees and different things, greenery as their roof of their sukkah. The Samaritans, they take etrogim, they take fruits, they take the most beautiful colored fruits and build these beautiful, beautiful booths, but also inside their house. So first thing is that the idea of the Samaritans is they take the law of Moses, the Torah, which has a few discrepancies to what we use as Jews for our Torah. Their Torahs are a few thousand different small discrepancies, but one of the things that they do is that they take the law from the Torah very literally, which is that when it says on Sukkot, they're supposed to take the Eitz Pri Hadar, the goodly fruit, that it's not talking about using it as holding it as a lulav and etrog like we always do, that it's meaning you have to bring it all together and use that to build your sukkah, to build your booth. And all the more so, it doesn't just mean an etrog. You can see pomegranates, you can see lemons, you can see citrons, you can see any number of different fruits that aren't just etrogim that decorate their sukkah. Now, the one other thing that I want to point out, which is really interesting, is you'll notice that the sukkah for the Samaritans is actually indoors. And this is a tradition that dates back over 1,500 years. That goes back to the Byzantine period, that when the Christian Byzantine rule of Israel or Palestine starting from the 4th century BC, from the 4th century CE. So the Samaritans revolted against their rule. And so to respond back, the Byzantines burnt down all of their sukkahs. And so in order to respond so that the sukkahs wouldn't get burnt, was they would bring the Sukkot into the house. Because it doesn't say that you have to have your booths outside necessarily. So they brought their Sukkot inside the house. And that is what they do still to this day, is that they build their sukkah in the house, which is, as a Canadian, and also in Chicago, it's much nicer in a way for weather control. You actually get to sit in your sukkah for sure every single day of the year. And the other custom that they have on Sukkot is similar to that Ezra and Nehemiah, which is that they go up to the top of the hill of Har Bracha, which you can see down below the mountain over here is the city of Nablus or Shechem. And the Samaritans live on the top of this hill, which is called Har Grizim, where it might be famous for any of you guys who have had this tchina before, which is the tchina of Har Bracha. It is the best tchina in all of Israel. And I don't know if it's available in Chicago or if it's available just in Israel, but next time you're in Israel, definitely pick up this tchina. You'll have the most delicious hummus you've ever had in your life if you make it with this tchina. So, and it comes from the Samaritan community from Har Bracha, from Mount Grizim. And on the top of the mountain, they have this ancient site that dates back at least 2,000 years, and maybe even more than that, where they had this temple. And on Sukkot, they have a tradition of going to the top of the mountain and reading from the scrolls up on the top of the mountain, which is actually reading from their Torah scroll, which is also similar to Cochin in India, where they also take this tradition from Ezra and Nehemiah of reading from the Torah on Sukkot, where 6-year-old males read from the books of the prophets for the first time in their life when they on the holiday of Sukkot. So not even bar mitzvah, but they come and read it there. Now it's interesting that I'm comparing the Samaritans getting this tradition from Ezra and Nehemiah's time, because Ezra and Nehemiah particularly hated the Samaritans and all of their traditions. But it's interesting that the one tradition that the Samaritans have held on to from the period of Ezra and Nehemiah is from reading the Torah scrolls, as Ezra and Nehemiah did when they reinstituted Sukkot. So I'm going to turn the floor over to David in just a second to talk about the next crazy tradition of Sukkot that isn't celebrated anymore, which is this weird holiday festival tradition that takes place here. So David, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Josh. So according to our ancient rabbis, this time of Sukkot had within it, during the holiday of Sukkot, one of the most raucous festivals that we have recorded. So this text comes from the Mishnah and then later the Talmud. So we're talking about at least a 2,000-year-old custom. So this is what our rabbis begin by saying. Kol mi shelo ra'a simchat beit ha-shoeva, lo ra'a simcha b'yamav. Any person who has not seen the rejoicing of the Beit HaShoeva, what's called the water drawing festival, that person has never really seen joy in their life. So you think you've had happy days before. You think when the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, that was a good day. You think you've seen happy festive days before. You haven't seen anything if you didn't see the Beit HaShoeva, the water drawing festival. What were some of the things that happened? They would take the worn out trousers of the Kohanim, the priests, and their belts. They would make wicks and use these to kindle them. And there was not a courtyard. There wasn't a courtyard in all of Jerusalem that wasn't illuminated by the lights of this festival. So first of all, it was well lit up in a time before strobe lights or anything like that. It was lit up brightly, ready for a party, just like Josh is showing you here in this one particular image. And then what else would they do? The Leviim, the people who would assist the priests, the musicians, they would pull out their biggest bands, right, with harps and lyres and cymbals and trumpets and innumerable, right? I love this. Vichlei shir below mispar. You couldn't even count the number of instruments that they would have, and they would play all of these songs. And then what did we just do on Rosh Hashanah? We had the shofar. They would pull out the shofar. They pull out the shofar and do tkiya. They'd be sounding the shofar, playing all these musical instruments. But that's not the craziest that it would get. It gets even crazier. The rabbis and the leaders would perform entertaining acts. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, one of the great rabbis, used to take 8 lighted torches and throw them in the air and catch one and throw one, and they didn't touch one another. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel was a master juggler, and he would prostrate himself. He would bow down and dig his thumbs in the ground and bend and kiss the ground and draw himself up. He would do effectively somersaults and handstands. Levi, another rabbi, would juggle 8 knives at one time. Samuel would juggle 8 glasses of wine. This is where I think I don't know why, but like it suddenly gets super lame. So all these people did these really impressive things. And then they say Abaye would juggle 8 eggs, or some say 4 eggs. That's where, like, I don't understand why the rabbis.
Who likes Abaye anyways?
Right. I don't know. Abaye's like, oh, well, I can't juggle 8 glasses of wine or like 8 knives or 8 lighted torches, but I can juggle some eggs, but I might drop some. So I'm only going to juggle 4 of them. But anyway, you see from these rabbis, they're doing all these entertaining acts, even if they're, I mean, I guess I can't juggle 4 eggs, so it's more impressive than what I can put together. But then they say, Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania, this one rabbi says, when we went to this rejoicing, when we went to the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, thanks, Max, I do need to up my game. You are 100%. I should spend more time over the high holidays practicing my juggling skills than I spend writing lame sermons. But Rabbi Joshua ben Hanania says, when they went to this festival of the water drawing, they didn't sleep. So here was his daily schedule when they went to this week-long water drawing festival. The first hour, they did the morning sacrifice. Then they went to prayer. So they were, at the beginning of the day, they were very well behaved. They did their sacrifices. They did their prayers. Then they did the additional sacrifice, the Musaf sacrifice. Then they did this additional prayers. Then they went to the Beit HaMidrash. They went to study. But then they started eating and drinking, and then more sacrifices, which really meant that they were eating more meat. And then they stayed up all night going to the party. So it's really this very long. Sukkot is associated with being what is called, our rabbi says, Zman Simchatenu, this time of great joy. And where its roots are in this 2,000 plus year old water drawing festival, where our rabbis were praying for rain. They were hoping for a season with a lot of rain to help their crops. And in the midst of that water drawing festival, there were a lot of parties. And so that's what Sukkot is in many ways largely associated with, this massive festival. Josh, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, so just to get a sense of what kind of the water drawing actually is, because it's so funny that all this talk is about like all the crazy parties that take place, but there's very little talk about what actually took place that has to do with water drawing. So what actually took place with the water drawing? So we don't really exactly know. We don't know from the Talmud. They don't really discuss it. But the idea is that this is the look of what the Second Temple period of Jerusalem would have been like in the Second Temple period, 2,000 years ago, where this is where the Black Dome of Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this mosque that's over here, you can see the Temple Mount of today. So this stretch that's over here is the original downtown core of Jerusalem, where the Golden Dome is where the temple was. As you can see from just.
Wait, Josh, can you point to it again? Can you go back to that image? So show us where the temple is, and then show us where the downtown area was at the time.
this golden dome, the Dome of the Rock of today. So that's where the temple once stood. The Al-Aqsa Mosque of today is where essentially like the Beit Midrash or the courts, all that kind of stuff would have been. This whole courtyard would have been open. I'll show you that in just a second. And the original core of Jerusalem is this hill that's over here. It also, people lived in this area as well, where the old city is today, and even a little bit further to the north of the old city. But generally, the most important areas of the city were actually here. This is where all the schools and actually even some synagogues and the wealthiest, the downtown core, again, of Jerusalem was this hilltop. And this is the original city of David. So if you're looking at Jerusalem from the south, it's over here. This is what it would have looked like. And this tower is what's protecting the only water source in Jerusalem. And it would bring the water down towards this pool that's over here. And in the ceremony, the priest, the high priest, would take water from this spring that's from the pool that's over here and bring it up to the temple. And so they bring it up to the temple that's over here, where thousands of people would be gathered up on the top over here on the Temple Mount itself and getting ready to party. Now, here's where the really crazy part comes in and how it gets even more connected to the weirdness of Sukkot. So what do we have over here? So we're having this big water festival that's taking place. That's during the time of the Hashmonaim, during the time of the Maccabees. And one of the Maccabean kings, one of the Hasmonean kings, is this man over here named Alexander Yanai. So Alexander Yanai is very famous for having a street in Jerusalem right near Mamila Mall, but also happens to be, before he was a street next to the Mamila Mall in Jerusalem, he happened to be a king, a great Hasmonean king, who ruled from 103 BC to 76 BC, the longest reigning of all the Hasmonean kings. He's someone who expanded the Judean kingdom from this green space to all this kind of purple space that's over here. A huge, massively important king that brought lots and lots of glory, lots of tax dollars, lots of fame to the Hasmoneans for sure, was under Alexander Yanai. He also happened to be a high priest and not just the king, which made him also the least liked king of all the Hasmonean kings, which says quite a lot, actually, because there were a lot of not liked kings of the Hasmoneans, which is something that we're going to talk about on our Hanukkah tour, Amy, which we're going to get into later on. But Alexander and I, there's this great story that Alexander, which is written in Josephus, that he goes up to celebrate this Simchat Beit HaShoeva, the water drawing festival, to the top of at the Temple Mount. And what he's supposed to do as the high priest is he's supposed to pour one jug of water and one jug of wine into this basin at the same time. And this is a festival that was immensely popular with all the people of Israel and of Judea. Now, the people who didn't like this festival were the priests. The priests said, this is a pagan ritual that's water worshiping, that's trying to pray for rain. We're just supposed to give sacrifices to God. We're not supposed to do this pouring water out and try to get rain that way. This is a pagan ritual. We shouldn't be doing this. So what does Alexander Yanai do? In order to appease both the priests, who he's the head of, and the people who he's the king of, he takes the water, takes the wine, and pours it on his own feet instead of into the basin. And this got everyone upset from both sides. And he did it during the holiday of Sukkot. And what does everyone have in Sukkot? The nation rose up against him and pelted him with citrones. They pelted him with all of these etrogim, because all the people of Israel had all of these etrogim, and they're pelting him with all these etrogim. And what does he do to punish them back? Well, he kills 6,000 people. So it doesn't really have a great ending to the story. But it does teach us a really interesting way to do some civil protest, maybe in Israel during the Sukkot holiday. If you can't leave your house for more than a kilometer or whatever, you can just start throwing etrogim at people. Not that I'm encouraging that kind of a thing, but especially because we don't want to have 6,000 of us being killed by our king. But that's besides the point. We're not going to get into politics. This really interesting story that takes place about Alexander Yanai. Now, why am I pointing this out about Alexander Yanai, which is interesting? Well, if you look at his coins that were minted in his honor, you have this wheel symbol. You have this other symbol that's over here, which is like this stand. But none of his coins that have been found have anything to do with greenery and leaves Now, if you look at the king that was before him, Yochanan Hyrcanus, you have these kind of leaves of glory, which was a symbol both in Greece and in Israel. And also in the middle, you have something that looks like an etrog. You have something that looks like this citron. And later on, if you look at the coins of Bar Kochva, which we're about to get into in just a second, the lulav is that central focus of the coin itself. In the year 133, in the year 134, these coins, that it was famous all throughout the Hasmonean period, but also later on, that the coins of the Judea, or the people of Israel, that the lulav was this very, very important symbol. And it's just really funny to note that, I can hear some background noise. Okay, great. So it's just really interesting to note that in Alexander Yanai's coins, that he does not have any, not just an etrog, not just a lulav, he doesn't have anything related to anything natural, and it's probably from that post-trauma of being pelted with all those etrogim. Now, the next generation after the Hasmoneans is Bar Kochva. And Bar Kochva, one of the major places that he resided was out here in the Judean desert by the Dead Sea is where we are right now. And in all of these different caves that the Yigal Yadin, the great Israeli archaeologist from the 1960s and 50s and 70s, so when he was exploring all these different caves, one thing that he finds is this scroll with this letter that is actually signed by Shimon Bar Yochai. And Shimon Bar Yochai was the prince or the king of this Israel that's revolting against the Romans in the year 133 CE, and has a successful revolt for 5 years until it's not so successful. So what does he write in this letter? He writes to these other soldiers is that you need to make sure that you pack for the soldiers the palm branches, the lulavim, the citrons, the etrogim, towards all the camps, and the hadassim and the aravim, that all of the soldiers who are fighting against the Romans, that even if they're really far away from Jerusalem and can't celebrate the holiday of Sukkot, that they should have these, the 4 species being sent to them, the lulav and etrog. It was so important to Bar Kochva that the soldiers knew that they weren't just fighting against the Romans as a secular state, but they're fighting for a Jewish state. And when Yigal Yadin discovers this letter, he immediately goes and brings it to the president of Israel at the time, Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, who we mentioned on our C2C tour, who's the greatest, my favorite of all kind of modern Israeli heroes in a way. And he goes to the president Ben-Zvi and he says, Mr. President, I have a letter to you from a past president, Shimon Bar Yochai, that we have to be celebrating Sukkot as this holiday that is this Jewish holiday in a Jewish state. And what's interesting is that this holiday, going back to Alexander Yanai, that the holiday of Sukkot was so important to the Hasmoneans and to Alexander Yanai's fathers, to his grandfathers, the Maccabees, was that even during the heat of war in the 130s, when they're revolting against the Greeks, is that when it wasn't possible to make pilgrimage to Jerusalem for Sukkot, they celebrated Sukkot during Chanukah. And they call Chanukah, the holiday of Chanukah, based on that tradition of Solomon, that Chanukat Beit HaMikdash, that the dedication of the temple, just like Solomon dedicated the temple on Sukkot, we're going to celebrate Sukkot on Chanukah because of this great time of uncertainty that we wouldn't be able to celebrate the holiday. But now let's go around the world and try to find some other really interesting Sukkot traditions. And so now we're in Lekef, Tunisia, where you can see this really beautiful ancient city that's over here. And in Lekef, Tunisia, there's this ancient synagogue that's known as, it's one of the 4 Chariba synagogues. That when you go inside the synagogue, we actually weren't able to go inside the synagogue, so we're going inside the church itself. Inside the synagogue, they have these ancient artifacts, this Eliyahu's bench that dates back a few hundred years. You can see the restored version of what the synagogue is now with all these ancient Torah scrolls that you can see actually are these Sephardi Torah scrolls, right? Because this is the kind of Spanish Jewish community that lived in Tunisia. But what's interesting about Lekef, Tunisia, is that this was one of, again, the series of 4 or 5 Chariba synagogues, which are these pilgrimage synagogues. These aren't synagogues that are made for Jewish communities that live in Lekef, but it's places where every Sukkot in Lekef, Tunisia, this is where all the Jews of Tunisia and Algeria would come here to this synagogue. And they would celebrate by giving sacrifices. They would essentially slaughter goats, not just for themselves, but also for all of the people around them. And the Jewish community would do that with the Christians and the Muslims that lived in Tunisia. And the big Jewish contribution would be couscous, that they would give couscous to all the people as well. And if you go to another place, to Mesrit, Morocco, it's in this kind of the Atlas Mountains of Morocco. Now, one cool thing about the Atlas Mountains of Morocco is this is a place where they actually grow these etrogim. I'm going to get into the history of the etrog in just a second. But, so they grow these etrogim, which is really important for when there's a Shemitah year in Israel, every 7 years, when you're not allowed to enjoy the benefits of the fields in Israel. So there's this clandestine trade that takes place with Morocco, which doesn't officially have economic ties with Israel, but they trade all the Moroccan etrogim and bring them to Israel during the Shemitah years. And it's a really important part of the economy in Morocco. And you can see kind of a picture of the Moroccan Jews that are from Timzeret. And one of the cool places in this area, in Timzeret, Morocco, is this tomb of Rabbi Moshe David. Now, according to Jewish tradition, Rabbi Moshe David might be a rabbi from either 200 years ago or 900 years ago. Kind of like with Abaye in the Talmud with juggling eggs. He either juggled 8 eggs or 4 eggs. It wasn't that he juggled 7 or 6 or 5. We know that this Rabbi Moshe David was from either 900 years ago or 200 years ago, but we have no idea, and it wasn't anything in between. So what's special about this is that Rabbi Moshe David, during an epidemic that was taking place in Morocco, he chances upon coming to this area of Morocco to raise funds for his yeshiva in Jerusalem. And he gets to here, and he's afflicted by the pandemic, and he takes on all of the pandemic from everyone around him in the town and says, I will take on the disease from everyone and die for all of you and heal all of you instead. And that's essentially what he does. And to this day, there's a pilgrimage festival in Morocco for Jews and non-Jews that go to Rabbi Moshe David's grave, and they'll leave a coin at his grave, spend the night somewhere in the area, and then come back the next day and bring back that coin, and that will give you some sort of healing from your ailments. And this festival would also take place, or this was also a place that was on Sukkot, the people of Morocco would come together to Rabbi Moshe David's grave. Where again, there would be all these different festivities for Jews and non-Jews alike. Now, why do I bring that up about Jews and non-Jews alike? Is because one of the most famous mentions of Sukkot in Tanakh is from the book of Zechariah, the book of Zechariah, where it says, all who survive all those nations came up against Jerusalem shall make pilgrimage year by year, bow low to the King of God, and to observe the Feast of Booths. That Sukkot, unlike any of the other holidays, that during the Messianic age, during Sukkot, this will be a holiday that all peoples will commemorate, that all peoples will celebrate together. And now we're going to go into Tzfat. So we're bouncing all over the world, back and forth, back and forth. We're in Tzfat in Israel. And just one of the cool things about Tzfat is that there's this house in Tzfat that actually has this Hadass tree, a willow tree that's in, sorry, not a willow tree, the myrtle tree that's actually in someone's house. Now the original city of Tzfat was surrounded by Hadass trees. That there's a famous story of one of the founders of Jewish Tzfat, Yitzchak ben Luria, who we discussed a little bit on our C2C trip, where he would go out to the trees of the Hadass trees that were surrounding the city of Tzfat, and that was where he would do Kabbalat Shabbat to welcome in the Sabbath, because it was the holiest thing to do. Now nowadays, and this is a look at what the fruit of the Hadass look like. Nowadays, the Hadassim, there's only 49 wild Hadassim left in Israel, even though it used to be a native tree. And that's because of during Sukkot, people always coming in, chopping down so many branches in order to celebrate the holiday. Now, another one of the interesting things I said I'd get to is the etrogim. Now, we know what an etrog looks like regularly, but the Yemenites, in Yemen, they would grow two different types of etrogim. One that was small and one that was huge, that could weigh up to 15 pounds. And so you can see these large etrogim to this day that some Yemeni Jews still use to this day, where you can go to the etrog market in Jerusalem, in the Shuk in Jerusalem, and you can find etrogim that are in the spirit of these Yemeni etrogim, that are these massive etrogim that you can find. Some that, again, you can see there are these massive etrogim that can weigh up to 15 pounds, which is just pretty cool to see. And they're much smoother than the regular etrogim. Again, there were two different types that were grown. What's really interesting about the etrogim, which unfortunately we don't have enough time to get into now, was that the etrog market isn't just important for Morocco, but the etrog market in ancient days was this incredibly, incredibly important thing that the Jews of all over Europe were demanding etrogim. Now, etrogim can't be grown, the citron fruit can't be grown north of Italy. So the Jews that were living in Germany, in Poland, and Austria were demanding these etrogim. And because the market was so powerful and so important, in the 1100s, when there was a peace treaty between Tuscany and Pisa, it was part of the peace treaty that Tuscany demanded that they are the only ones who are allowed to give the etrogim, that they're the only ones who are allowed to trade to the north the etrogim that are grown in Tuscany. And this is actually something that later on in the Ottoman period, Albania, so in the 1700s, Albania somehow gets this monopoly on the etrog market in all of Europe, and it becomes this big source of tension between the Ottoman Empire and the various empires in Europe. So it's really cool to think it's not just like our fruit that's being like sold all around the world, but it's this crazy market that is kind of just going nuts. Another thing that you can do in Israel is you can look at all the different Sukkot that are here. There's a place called Ne'ot Kedumim, which is also the place that my wife and I got married. Not actually in this spot particularly here, but you can go to Ne'ot Kedumim, and you can see all these various Sukkot.
Josh, if I can pause for a second. So Ne'ot Kedumim is a place that's this, it's sort of like an outdoor biblical museum, I guess. I don't know how else to say it. It's like this massive outdoor area where they take all of these things that show up in the Bible and rabbinic literature and make it physically alive. So there are all these sections that Josh is about to show you in the Mishnah, right? So these 2,000-year-old texts from our rabbis that talk about what's a kosher and what's not a kosher sukkah. So can you have a sukkah like this one is on the back of a wagon? Can you have a sukkah on the back of an animal? Can you have two sukkot on top of each other? They actually build them so you can see what the Mishnah is actually talking about. But so Josh, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, that's perfect. And more importantly is that you can actually see my sister, who's still there to this day, waiting for Sukkot. You can see her. She's just sitting underneath the 20 Amah Sukkah. So Rina, hi. I hope you're doing okay, and I hope you're staying okay in quarantine underneath your Sukkah. So it's just really fun to enjoy those pictures as well. Just, again, quickly, because we don't have too much time, but just to enjoy some of the old Sukkot from all over the world. This is an image of Sukkot from Germany from 1723. If you go into the Israel Museum to this day, you can still see this sukkah, which was rescued from Germany in 1937, which is this old, beautiful painted sukkah from the 1820s, where you can see how they would decorate the sukkah, where they have these images of Jerusalem from people that never would have seen Jerusalem with their own eyes. They have a Venice sukkah with this boat that's over here. You have a Bukharian sukkah, which is also, again, it's a really famous holiday in the Bukharian areas. You have in Holland, you have a sukkah that, keeps people cool still, where you can put your roof back over top of the roof in case you need to keep your roof from icing over. You have, again, this really beautiful sukkah. This is actually from Petach Tikva in Israel that was made in the 70s by this amazing artist named Shalom Zev Reshelbach. You have the Iraqi sukkah that, again, has this Iraqi flavor to it, a Kurd sukkah, an Italian sukkah, which is this sukkah that's over here is actually the earliest drawn sukkah ever. It's from the British Library Archives, which is from the 1100s, I believe, as the earliest known sukkah that we've ever seen, where, again, it looks like you have all these different four species that are making the sukkah. And one
John,
final really...
like you said, there's either like a reconstruction of them or the original in the Israel Museum as a permanent display, right?
Well, there was a display in 2003. These are all these images of what they were like in 2003 when they had the display. The only one that you can still see now is this one, which is still in the corner. We're actually sitting in the Israel Museum right now. And so the only one that's in the Israel Museum to this day is this German one that was saved just before the Holocaust. And there's another one There's another sukkah that's in New York, I believe, that was actually a sukkah that was hidden underground that survived the Holocaust from, I believe, Germany as well. May have been from Poland, but I don't remember exactly. But I think you can see it in New York. One of you may have seen it in the Jewish Museum in New York. I don't know. You might be able to correct me. One last little final place to visit of the strange Sukkot, which is actually going to Gondor in Ethiopia, where the Beta Yisrael would build their tukul, their houses. Now, in Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Jewish community, which dates back at least 2,000 years as well, and they date themselves back also to the time of Solomon, according to their tradition, they wouldn't build Sukkot because their houses were essentially the same as a sukkah, whereas all built from natural material, and they could have these Sukkot as well. And you can see from these images from the 1980s, the tukul houses that are over here. If you go to Kiryat Gat to this day, you can see a reconstruction of what these towns would have looked like for the Beta Yisrael. And you get this really cool cultural experience there, but you can actually sit in a house of the Beta Yisrael, of the Ethiopian Jewish community, and you can see that it essentially is a sukkah, even though it's rounded and doesn't have exactly, cornered walls or whatever, but they wouldn't build Sukkot, but they would still celebrate Sukkot. And much in the news right now is the Haredi community in Israel, and one of the most beautiful times to visit the Haredi community in Israel, especially in Mea Shearim, Jerusalem, is to go to during Sukkot and to see all of the beautiful Sukkot that are built over here and the piles of the palm branches that they use to decorate the sukkah and to use it as the roofs of their sukkah. And to kind of conclude our final time here together, this is my house my parents' house in Hamilton, where I am right now. And this is my ima, my mother, and me, and my sister building our sukkah using corn stalks and evergreen trees. And the interior of the sukkah, which you can still see, is that same blue tarp that I've got in my background that's over here. And you can see all of us together. This might have been the last time that we were together underneath the sukkah, which was a very long time ago, I guess, where you have me and my brother and Rebecca as well, as all of you guys know. And some of you may also know my parents, Lonnie and Joel, and Rena and Sarah as well. Now our family's gotten a little bit bigger. But to make my family a little bit more nostalgic, this is actually my grandparents' old house, Zichronam Livracha. And you can see, oops, the pictures aren't loading up as quickly as I thought they might. You can see my brother, here's young little David with the lulav and etrog, and my Saba, Zichrono Livracha, and my Savta decorating the sukkah. This must have been from the early 80s. And also kind of, this is what they had a kind of wooden panel as their sukkah. And I wanted to finish with you guys with just kind of one last song, which is just a really fun song about Sukkot, one that maybe not all of you have heard before, which is the Naomi Shemer song, which for some reason the Spotify is taking a second to load. Here we go, 1 second. So, and I was going to end with just kind of one final last little thought, and then I'm happy to stay on and take a couple of questions, which is something that my Abba points out right now we're reading the LeDavid Adonai Orivi Ishi until Hoshana Rabbah, which is something we started at the beginning of Elul. And my Abba always likes to point out that the one thing I asked from the Lord, if I had one thing that I could ask from God, what is it? It's to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, to frequent his temple, and he will shelter me in his pavilion on an evil day, grant me the protection of his tent, and raise me high upon a rock. And over here, it even uses the word ki yitzvaneni b'sukkah, b'sukkot, that we're going to be in God's sukkah. And the most beautiful image that actually Abraham Joshua Heschel uses about Sukkot is actually in his book called The Sabbath. And in The Sabbath, he talks about how Shabbat is essentially like we get to carry around with us this bubble of a sukkah all around us all the time, that we have this bubble of holiness around us. And on Sukkot, we get to go inside and we're transformed from the mundane into the holy just by stepping inside this weird, funny-looking custom that we've been tracking for the last few thousands of years, this pilgrimage festival, this holiday of pilgrimage, this holiday of togetherness, this holiday of greenery, this holiday of fruits and agriculture and all these amazing things. And I hope that you got the sense of the complexity and the strangeness and the beauty of this wonderful, wonderful pilgrimage festival, which unfortunately, even though with all of the history of pilgrimage, that Sukkot of all the holidays is so pilgrimagey, that we're supposed to go and meet together in Jerusalem or on Mount Gerizim with the Samaritans, or in Cochin with the Indian Jews, or with the Moroccan Jews, or with the Tunisian Jews, that wherever you are, you're supposed to come together on Sukkot. And unfortunately this year we can't do that, but I'm really glad that we get to do that at least virtually and get to talk about the history of all of the Jewish people who get to do that all throughout the years. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to David and Amy. But before I do, just thank you all so much for joining on another tour. I had such a lovely time with you all. And again, if you had a good time, feel free to spread the word to your friends and family from different communities if you think that this was something that they'll enjoy. You can leave me a review on TripAdvisor at Hartuv Tours, or follow me on Twitter or Instagram at Hartuv Tours, or you can just send me an email, josh@hartuvtours.com. And I'm happy to hear all of your feedback and responses because it really helps. I've heard from a lot of you throughout the different tours that I've been doing, and it's been really, really heartwarming to hear from you all. Thank you once again for joining, and I'm happy to stay on for some more questions and David announcements from you guys.
Well, Josh, thank you so much. I'll just say, yeah, really, it was just an amazing tour. Thank you again. Just to mention a few quick things. One, again, if you want to find out more about Josh and what he's doing, check out Hartuv Tours online. We're going to do another tour for Hanukkah. So stay posted for a couple months, and we're going to do another one then, which should just be fat. There's so much there with Hanukkah and being able to do a tour. So we hope you'll join us for that.
And we'll get to make fun of Alexander Yanai and throw etrogim at the screen.
There, yeah, exactly. So keep your etrog from Sukkot, people. But you can check out, I posted a link to all the stuff the synagogue is doing for Sukkot. We have a lot going on. So I just want to highlight a few things. One is on Thursday night, October 8th. There's going to be preparing for Hoshana Rabbah, which is effectively the last day of Sukkot itself, with Rabbi Siegel and Chazan Berkey. So that's going to be next Thursday night. It's going to be a fascinating session exploring all the complexity and interesting history of Hoshana Rabbah. Also, we have a lot of opportunities to connect with Yizkor, with the memorial services over the end part of the holiday. So next Friday in the morning at 11 a.m., we're going to do a Yizkor service over Zoom. And then the following day on Shabbat and Shmini Atzeret on October 10th, we're going to be having our live stream services, and also for up to 40 people, an in-person service at 1 p.m. So we invite you to join us for, there's registration for any of the in-person services. So please feel free to take a look there. And then also, if you want to sit in the sukkah, we have a time for you. So take a look on the website. You can sign up to register for a time to sit in the sukkah at the synagogue. We would just love to have you there for that. Finally, if you're a member, we're so glad you're a member of the synagogue. If you're not a member, we are so glad that you're here and that you got to be a part of this amazing session. We invite you, if you had a good time, to make a donation, a contribution to the synagogue, to our sustaining fund, because that's what allows us to do such amazing programs like this. And finally, again, just want to give big thanks to Josh, to Amy for organizing it all. We're going to stick around if people have questions or want to talk and schmooze for a few minutes. It's great to be. Amy, anything else that I missed or forgot? Did I get to it? Great. Well, it's again so nice to be with all of you. We'll stop the recording now and hope to see you all soon. Have a great rest of the week and a Chag Sameach.